Now it's time for your eye in the sky for the next 6 weeks' weather. Brought to you by Hawkeye Pro from Ravensdown, where the proof is in the paddock.
Time to talk weather. We do this every Tuesday afternoon with our very good friend Tony T from Blue Skies Weather. And Tony, you've just put the fear of God into me. I told you I'm going home for the first time in God knows how long on Saturday. Yeah. And you said I might struggle to get home. That's not helpful. Over Arthur's Pass. Thank you very much for that.
Well, look, it's going to be a very active period of weather that we're going to see over New Zealand between about Friday and Sunday. So those 3 days, pretty much for every part of New Zealand, is going to see some fairly high-energy, active weather pattern on at least one of those days. So we're looking at quite a major low-pressure system coming across the very far south of the South Island, strong northwesterly airflow ahead of it, strong southwesterly airflow following it. And so there's three things that have popped up in our forecasting that I think people need to take account of this week, and you need to take account of travelling on Saturday. The first is heavy rain. Okay, so in the usual places that pick up heavy rain from the north or the northwest, so places like the South Island West Coast, Tasman District, Nelson District, maybe parts of Marlborough, maybe parts of Taranaki in the North Island, they're going to see some heavy rain. It's not going to be flooding intensity rain where we'd have emergencies and things like that, but it's going to be enough that it could cause some problems. Slips, the odd washout here and there, a little bit of localised surface flooding, that sort of thing. Second thing that's going to come through with that, strong winds. So there's going to be parts of the South Island, particularly on Friday evening, Friday night and the early part of Saturday morning, where we're going to see gales. And we're going to see quite strong wind gusts. Canterbury, for example, is going to see strong gusty northwesterlies, wind gusts perhaps up to 100 kilometres an hour on the foothills of Canterbury in the early hours of Saturday morning. And then the third thing that follows all that through, more likely to be on Sunday, is a cold southwesterly airflow, and that's going to drop the snow level. And that's going to affect places like Southland and Otago, where you could be looking at snow down to perhaps 200 metre level, maybe even lower. Maybe even Dunedin City might see a few snowflakes. So it's going to be a very active period of weather through those 3 days.
So I remember you and I sitting here a week ago, and you were telling me that we could expect this at the end of May. Has this come forward a bit, or was this something different?
It is a little different. What we talked about last week was that settled period that we've been through, that settled 10 days.
Which I was hoping to when I get home.
But it hasn't quite extended long enough to accommodate your travel plans, unfortunately.
It's all about
the weather's like that, you see. It just doesn't always suit us. And then we expected the westerly airflows to ramp up, and this is an example of that. The strong northwest, followed by the strong cold southwest. This is exactly the ramp up that we talked about. Yes, coming through a little bit earlier than we talked about a week ago, but still much on track. We also talked about a breakdown at the end of May. Weren't quite clear how that was going to play out. The latest data suggests it may not be quite as dramatic as we thought last week in the sense of the risk of heavy rain or snows and things, but it's still going to be a pause in the westerlies, and we're going to see some other weather systems come across.
If I think back to my times farming, particularly on the West Coast, and you talked about that cold sou'wester coming in towards the end of that week, which puts us around about the 17th to the 20th or something like that of May, that's pretty standard. We would quite often get a bit of a front come through, drop the snow on the Alps, open the fridge door, that's it, winter's here, thanks autumn, that was it, you're done. That's a pretty standard South Island forecast. But it's just kind of come and bang on cue.
Yeah, the timing is exactly as most people would expect it to be. The contrast is going to be next week, and that's going to be interesting, because behind all this high-energy rain, wind, snow weather that's Friday to Sunday, we're going to see pretty much the whole of next week influenced by a high-pressure system coming in very slowly from the Tasman Sea. So most of next week, New Zealand will be under a southwesterly airflow, a bit more southwest over the South Island, a bit more south to southeast over the North Island. And that's going to make next week cool, quite cold in fact, frosty. So you've got to think frost. So frost will be a regular feature of the weather through next week, pretty much every night in the South Island, and maybe some nights in the North Island as well. Even places as far north as the Waikato might see their first frost of the autumn season during next week.
Okay. So again, not unexpected at this time of the year to get those sort of weather patterns, but certainly it is typical weather. Talk to me a little bit about then up into the North Island. We focused on the South Island on this. How are they? You did talk about Taranaki getting some of this, the western areas getting some of this rain coming through. I was talking to someone the other day and said it's been a bit dry in some places into the pretty much into the Waikato there is, and actually there's a couple of places here in Canterbury a bit dry. Are we starting to see a bit of a change here?
Yeah, and we talked about that a little bit last week too, Andy, that there are certainly some of the lighter soils in Canterbury have dried out a lot in recent times, and some of this rain will spill off the mountains on Friday and Saturday and bring a reasonable rainfall to the inland parts of Canterbury. So some of those areas will get a top up, not so much the eastern plains, but the western plains and western foothills will. But in the North Island, yes, there are some areas. We've been looking at these cyclones coming down from the subtropics ever since the beginning of the year and thinking like the whole North Island is covered in flooding rains. But actually, a lot of those flooding events were relatively localised, relatively confined to one or two particular regions. And you're quite right, there have been quite large areas of the North Island that missed out on substantial rains from those systems. And the bad news is, well, I don't know if it's bad news or not, but the news is that the general expectation over the next 6 weeks is for those areas to stay on the dry side.
So what sort of areas are we talking about here?
Well, we're talking about more the inland central parts of the North Island. So as you suggested, from Waikato southwards through towards Taupo, in towards the high country of the central North Island. Some of the more inland parts of the eastern North Island, so inland parts of Wairarapa and Hawke's Bay, they are quite dry. And the chances of significant rain there don't look particularly great. Now, having said that, a week of southeasterly airflow, which those areas will see next week, might bring a few showers, but generally it's going to be cold and fine rather than cold and wet. And so it won't help.
No. So looking at this wonderful report that you send me through, temperatures, looking at it, but even with that colder week coming up in next week, you're still saying that temperatures should be generally normal to above?
For the next 6 weeks as a whole, yes. So this week we've got relatively mild temperatures because of this northerly, northwesterly wind flow, right? Next week we've got a really cold week because of the southerly, southwest, southeast type wind flow. But that's really the only cold week signalled out of the next 6. So you get one cold week and you get 4 or 5 near normal or slightly warmer than normal weeks, and that balances it out.
Which is interesting because that will mean that soil temperatures will stay relatively high longer, which means grass growth could be extended.
The issue is the frostiness next week and the extent to which the frost burns the soil and starts to slow your growth rate down. But if you can get away without too much frost next week, then the following weeks could still be good grass growth weeks, taking you right through to the end of May.
So frost, you need, for a big frost, you need an absence of wind, generally.
Clear skies, light winds.
Yeah, but if you've got a bit of wind, even if it's cold, you won't get a frost because it tends to... So a little bit of wind could be your friend there.
Absolutely, and that'll perhaps be the saving grace for parts of the North Island that are in that southeasterly wind flow that I'm seeing for most of next week, whereas the South Island has the high pressure system come on, and that's where the winds drop out.
Brilliant, fantastic, looking forward to that, and thank you for that. Just looking out even further, what's the latest on the super? And I saw you a bit grumpy about this the way it's being portrayed in the media, and we've got to be careful not to over-egg the cake on this one, but the super El Nino, is what's firming up on that?
Yeah, I'm not grumpy. It's not that I'm grumpy about it. It's that I think we need to be realistic about the use of that word, super, formidable, whatever the word of the day is. You know, it's an El Nino event. It's definitely going to have moderate intensity. It may have high intensity. And if it does, then it may qualify for some of those words that are being used in the media. But that's not entirely clear at the moment. And there are some reasons to expect that it may not be the extreme event that some people are getting some mileage out of promoting. However, having said that, Next week will be the week to talk about that in some detail, because on next Monday I'll be updating my seasonal forecast for the June to August period and looking through to the rest of the year in slightly less detail, and that'll be available to clients on Monday or Tuesday next week. And I'm also producing a special report on El Nino that'll go out to the Blue Skies Outlook
looking
clients,
forward to that one.
because I've had so many people asking me questions and saying, what should we be looking at? What should we be doing? So I'm collating some information and some material about the sort of planning you can put in place now to take account of how the spring and summer season might evolve with that El Nino event. But basically, simple terms, wet in the west and south of the South Island, dry in the east of the South Island and for much of the North Island.
And what you've managed to do is you've managed to get the wrong weekend for duck shooting.
Well, how did you go on Saturday? Was there any cloud?
No, it was beautiful.
Oh, so I was right.
You were right. I didn't doubt you being right. You were absolutely right. All right, Tony, quickly before we go, running out of time, Cody's going to wind us up. How do people get your wonderful forecast? blueskies.co.nz/join. You will go to a page where you can fill in your email address and subscribe to the long range and seasonal outlooks. And as I say, that'll all be updated again next Monday. And I can attest to that. I get these wonderful notes. It tells me everything I need to know, except for I can't get home on Saturday. Right, I'm still might have to leave early. Tony, appreciate your time. Thank you. We'll talk to you next week.
Next Gen Tech. Backed by 40 years of soil science, Hawkeye Pro delivers insights every 10 metres to lift your farm's efficiency and sustainability and profitability. If you want more proof in the paddock, visit hawkeye.farm today.